All right, so this is the first video for proportional relationships in graphs. And what I want you to be able to do after this video is to complete a table if it describes a proportional relationship and provide justification for whether or not a relationship is proportional. In the past, you have looked at relationships and been able to tell whether or not it was proportional, but you've really just said yes it is or no it's not. Now I want us to take it to the next level and provide some justification and deepen our understanding. Here's some things that are important to remember: that a relationship or a rule that is proportional has to have this format. That's crucial. And remember that these A's right here, that's called the constant of proportionality, or the rule, or the multiplier of x, the thing that's multiplied by the input. So for example, if I had a rule like y equals 2x, well, 2 is my constant of proportionality because that's the A in this equation. And what this means is that my input, remember my input is x, I multiply every input by 2 to get my output. Remember, outputs are y's. And so if the formula of the rule fits this format, that's one way you can know if something's proportional. Another way that I like to think of it is if you know an output but don't know an input, you should be able to divide by A to figure out y, or to figure out x, excuse me. Let me say that again. If you know y right here, if you know this number but don't know x, you should be able to divide by A to figure out x, because the opposite of multiplication is division. Now, I realize that may not make a lot of sense, so let's go on to an example here where it will make more sense. Okay, so here's our directions. It says complete each table if it describes a proportional relationship. Explain whether each relationship is or is not proportional, providing justification for your answer. So there's a lot to do here. And here's the scenario. A worker types 45 words per minute. It looks like my inputs here are time and minutes, and my output is the y, or the typed words. So after 1 minute, 45 words were typed. After 2 minutes, obviously 90 words will be typed, but I want to talk about the math behind me finding this 2 here. This was pretty easy because I know it takes 2 45s to make 90, but let's talk about what actually happened. Okay, so this is our rule. Our rule is y equals 45 times our input, or our output equals 45 times the input. Y equals 45x. Now, in this particular case, the 1 and the 45 were filled in. But as you can see, the first blank that I had to fill on this table wasn't an output. So I kind of had to work the rule backwards to get the input value. This is what I mean. In this particular case, just on this line right here, okay, it told us the output was 90. So that's the y. I'm going to plug that in for y. And then we don't know what x is, but we know the rule is 45 times x. Remember how I said before, if a relationship's proportional, you should be able to just divide by A, or the constant of proportionality, to figure out x? Well, if you divided both sides by 45 here, what happens mathematically is these 45s cancel out, because 45 divided by 45 is 1. So all we're left with is x. And 90 divided by 45 is 2. So therefore, we've been able to algebraically figure out that the input must be 2. Now, most of you guys can do that in your mind. You can look at this and go, okay, it's 45 words per minute. So if he typed 90 words, it must have been 2 minutes. But what you really were doing was you were dividing 90 by 45. So keep that in mind. If you can work it backwards through division, then the rule is proportional. That's one way you could justify your answer. Another way you could justify an answer for this is if the rule right here fits the format of y equals ax, we know it must be proportional. In this case, a is 45. So I'm going to erase some of this and we're going to finish the problem now. So we got to complete the table. That's the first step. So let's finish doing the completion of this table. After 5, we remember our rule was this. So if we were to plug in 5 for an input, we get y equals 45 times 5. And 5 times 45, I'm going to do that on paper, so to speak, here, just to be sure I don't make a mistake. Should get us 225. Okay, cool. But now I'm faced with completing the this table again, but unfortunately, it gives me the output but not the input. So I'm going to plug in what I know. Remember, my rule was y equals 45x. I know that y is 360. So 360 equals 45 times some number x. I don't know what my input is. This is my question mark right now. So like I said before, if you can divide both sides to figure out x, the relationship's proportional. These cancel out because 45 divided by 45 is 1. And now if I figure out what this is, I'll know what x is. What's 36 divided by 45? Well, I'm going to take a guess here. I'm going to set myself up a division problem to do it. I'm going to guess, let's see here. I'm going to guess 7. No, I'm going to guess 8. 8 times 45. Let's do the math here real quick. 32 plus 4 is 360. Okay, good. My guess was right on. So 360, nothing left over. Okay, so x must equal 8. Therefore, I know that this missing input value is 8. Notice when I had to go from my, when they gave me the output or the y number and I was missing my x number, I had to use division. When the table gave me my x number and I needed my y number, I just plugged in the x into the equation and multiplied. So you can work it forwards or backwards, but remember the opposite of multiplication is division. Okay, cool. Now let's answer the very last part of this question. It says, tell whether or not each relationship is proportional. So I know that this relationship is proportional, but here's a few different ways that I know it. Okay, it is proportional. That's probably how I should word it. It is proportional. Because, remember we have to use that word because when we justify, because the rule of y equals 45x fits the y equals ax format, and I can use division to find a missing x value or a missing input. So those are two ways I know this is proportional. If I'm missing an x, I can use division. Also, it fits this key format right here. One more example. Okay, in this case, same directions up here. I won't reread them. We have to complete the table first, but it says Sam makes $6 per hour raking leaves plus a one-time payment of $10 for bringing his own equipment to the job. So, in this case, the rule would be my output would be equivalent to 6 times x. I know this is my inputs and these are my y's. So my total earnings is equal to 6 times the number of hours worked, because it's $6 per hour, plus that one-time input of $10, that one-time payment of $10. So now I want to finish the table here. Okay, I plug in 2 for my x number, so y equals 6 times 2 plus 10. Plug that in for the x, because that's my input. And so y equals 12 plus 10. That gets me to y equals 22. So I know this must be 22. But I want you to notice something about this rule, and that is it doesn't fit the y equals ax format. Check this out. If we compare these two equations together, we have an extra piece here. This plus 10 is extra, and there's no plus anything in this format here. So right off the bat, I can tell just by looking at the rule that it's not proportional because it doesn't fit the correct format. But you know what? I'm going to complete the table anyways, even though the directions say complete it if it's a proportional relationship, because I like a challenge. So I know if my output's 40 here, it says my y is 40, that must equal 6 times a number plus 10. Well, because I'm adding 10 to this side, I'm going to subtract it from both sides, so I'm going to do the opposite here. 6x plus 10, and I get my 40 over here. So I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides to get rid of this 10. So I end up with 30 is equal to 6x, because these 10s cancel out. 10 minus 10 is 0. Then I can divide both sides by 6, and I get x is equal to 5. Okay, so that makes sense. Now I'm going to double check this, though. What happens when x is 5? Do I actually get 40? I want to make sure I don't make mistakes. Well, if I stick x in here, or if I stick 5 in for x, it would be 6 times 5 plus 10, and that's y equals 30 plus 10, which is indeed y is indeed 40. So I know it works. You could guess and check if you didn't understand how I did that algebraically. That's fine. But this last one's going to be pretty easy because I know the rule here is y equals 6x plus 10. So if I plug in 8 for x and add a 10 to it after I multiply by 6, I should know exactly how much money would be made. It looks like in this case it would be $58. So I know this is not proportional. So let's finish up this question as our last example in this video. It is not proportional because, don't forget that word because. Sorry about my sloppy handwriting. Because the rule y equals 6x plus 10 does not fit the y equals ax format. Also, I couldn't just divide to solve for x. Remember when they gave us this 40 and we had to figure out what x was? I had to subtract 10 from both sides and then divide. That necessity, or that the reason I had to subtract 10 from both sides is because the relationship wasn't proportional, because there was an addition of something on top of this y equals ax. Remember back here in this example, it was proportional because it did fit the y equals ax format, and that I could just use division to solve for x. In this example, it didn't fit the format, and I couldn't just use division. It was harder for me to go from my y to my x value, to work it backwards. Anyways, I hope this video is helpful to you, and I know you're going to do well on the worksheet. At the end of the day, what I want you to focus on here is completing the tables, telling me if it's proportional, and if this part right here of my justification isn't making 100% sense to you, rely on this part right here. You can, oops, I made a weird line here. You can easily tell if something fits a format because you're just comparing it, right? So, for example, you could easily tell that this equation right here does not fit y equals ax. So if this part down here didn't make sense, use this to justify your answers. Good luck.